So I'm hoping everyone can see the slides on the screen. Is that okay with everyone? Thumbs up? Yeah, brilliant. Okay. Good evening, everyone. Thanks, Mihal, for that introduction. As Mihal said, my name is Nuala. I'm the Chief Executive Officer with the Irish Peatlands Conservation Council. And this evening's talk, we're going to look at some of our raised bogs plants. Now, I can't go through every single plant that we will find on a raised bog, but we will go through quite a number of them, and I'll talk about, some of the characteristics of them that we should be looking at. We'll also start with, I suppose, an introduction into, the peatlands and how that can impact on the plants and where you might find them on your local raised bog. So an overview then of who IPCC are, just as a quick introduction. We're a national charity. We were founded in 1982, and our mission is to conserve a representative sample of Irish peatlands for people to enjoy today and in the future. This is our headquarters at the Bog of Allen Nature Centre in County Kildare. We own and manage in partnership 6 peatland reserves nationally, Lodge Bog and Lullymore West, local to the IPCC in Kildare, Fenner Bog in partnership with the Moyne-Finneoirk Development Association in County Waterford, 8.5 hectares of Gurley Bog in County Meath, Ketslop, County Clare, and Code Bog in County Kerry. Our work includes peatland site conservation, species monitoring, policy, research and education and awareness. And our work is guided by a series of peatland conservation action plans. We've developed 7 since our foundation in 1982, the latest being Peatlands and Climate Change, which of course we recommend you read in conjunction with our Halting the Loss of Peatland Biodiversity. You can learn more about our work on ipcc.ie. So to start this evening, I thought we'd do a quick overview on peatlands, not knowing how much the participants would know about peatlands. So please forgive me if you are all well experienced in peatlands. Bear with me just for a couple of moments. So bogs or peatlands, they're wetlands. So they're 90% water and 10% plants. They've covered over 1 million hectares in Ireland. So that represents over 20% of our island is actually peatland habitat. And peatlands is a result of the accumulation of partially decayed plants over thousands of years. They're acidic in nature, ranging from 3.7 to 5.2. And because of this waterlogged condition, the agents of decay don't work in a typical peatland. So they're extremely nutrient poor environments. So healthy peatlands have a water table within about 20 centimeters of the surface throughout the year. And sphagnum moss, which we'll talk a little bit later on, is the main peat forming plant, grows 1 millimeter a year and stores over 20 times its own weight in water. So when we look at these key characteristics of peatlands, first off, they're wetlands. So the plants that live on a bog have to be adapted to the wetland environment. The next thing the plants have to adapt to, of course, is the acidic nature. The third element they have to adapt to then is the fact that they're an extremely nutrient poor environment. So we have to consider this when we look at our peatland plants and those that we'll find living on our raised bogs. And of course, when we look at the landscape of a peatland, they're very open. So they're exposed to the extremes of our environment. If we were to visit a bog, we'd always say, prepare for the weather, because the Irish weather is very changeable. And if it's going to rain on a bog, we're going to get wet. So raincoat is needed. And if it's sunny on a bog, there's no shelter right there. So all of the plants are exposed to these temperature extremes and abiotic factors or non-living factors that would affect the bog as well. So really, we might describe a peatland as quite a harsh environment for these plants to survive on. Now, why are peatlands so valuable? And they're valuable for many reasons. Of course, we know their uses as a domestic fuel, the value from what's beneath them, so generation of electricity and horticulture. But today we know so many more values of Irish boglands, from the rich and diverse habitat for biodiversity. And that's what we're going to focus on this evening, some of these unique plants that live on our bog. Of course, water regulation. They help prevent flooding. The sphagnum mosses store this water and slowly release it. Carbon storage. It's estimated peatlands contain about 64% of Ireland's soil organic carbon, a source of food. Cranberries, bilberries, or you might know them as frohans, grow on Irish bogs. Of course, recreational opportunities and inspiration to artists and poets, an economic resource and a land bank for agriculture. So peatlands really are a true landscape that offers our communities so much throughout the Midlands of Ireland. Now, one of the things we would encourage you to do is really to look at your peatland, and you can assess the condition of your local peatland. And assessing the condition is important is because this will tell us really kind of about what plants we might expect out there to find on our boglands. So when we look at it, there's a key few indicators that we should look for when we're completing a habitat assessment on our bog. And of course, it's the sphagnum mosses. These are our bog builders, the main peat former. So if you want to know the condition of a bog, really, if you're walking along the bog and you're seeing lots of sphagnum mosses, it's a really good sign. Whereas if we're seeing a lot of bare peat, it can indicate drying. So you might find drainage associated with that. If we've increased grazing, this is called trampling to the plants on the bog. If we've experienced a bog fire, this in turn can have an impact on the plants. If we forest the peatlands, they also can have an impact, because now we've gone from this open landscape to very enclosed. So it can really change the whole dynamics of a peatland. We might have invasive species on a peatland. And of course, we know invasive species, get their name because they're quite competitive, and they can really challenge our typical peatland plants. And of course, turf cutting and peat harvesting, because of course, what we'll do there is we need to get at the peat underneath the bog. So often the peatland plants are impacted by that as well. So really, when you can undertake a habitat assessment, if you were to, on your local peatland, this will also give you an indication of, one, the health of the bog, but also it can also give you an indication as to the typical plants that we might not find, or we might find more dominant in the bogland as well. This is what a healthy peatland profile looks like. So just kind of a slice down through the bog. We really want a kind of a high cover of sphagnum mosses. These are the specialist bogland plants. We know them as the bog builders. And when you look at a peatland as well, it really looks like it's a flat surface. But any of you who've walked on a bog, you know it's not flat. It's made up of two areas. We have hummocks, which are the drier areas of the bog, and then our hollows. These are wetter areas of the bog. And in between these, we have what we know as a lawn area. So we've got three kind of defined areas now within the bog surface. And within this, to avoid competition, all of our peatland plants have kind of adapted their own way to live. And as I said, on this wet environment, in this environment that's open to the extremes of all our abiotic factors, and to survive in this very nutrient poor conditions that we have on the bog. As we see there, water table is really nearly close to the surface, ideally within 10 centimeters. Typically, though, with most bogs, it might be around 20 centimeters of the surface, and that will fluctuate throughout the year. Obviously, you're going to have more drying in the summertime, you're going to get more water in the winter months or the autumn months. Mind you, today it's raining pretty heavy where I am, so I don't know if that's a good indicator with climate change at the moment. But this is what your peatland surface really should look like. It's a carpet of these raised bog plants, and from this slide, what we're beginning to understand is that plants are going to be zoned. We've got hummocks, the drier areas, hollows, the wetter, and between these two areas we know as lawns. So the features then of an active raised bog, so it's going to be peat forming, and you're going to have a continuous cover of sphagnum mosses. The sphagnum mosses will be up to a depth of between 4 and 6 meters. The water table at or near the surface within the year. And one thing element about a raised bog as well, it's very gently sloping. We don't have any really steep kind of slopes, what you might find typical on our blanket bogs, and it has continuous supply of water coming in from rainfall. So as I said, this first element was about really looking at kind of just a very quick overview of bogs. And what I'm hoping we take from it is to understand that it's as a wet environment, it's a nutrient poor environment. We have different areas on the surface, the hummocks, the hollows, and the lawns. It's acidic environment, and it's exposed to the outdoors. If we were to begin to kind of undertake an identification session of bog plants, one of the first pieces of equipment you're going to need is some type of bog plant key. This is one that the IPCC produced back in 1998. The challenge with this at the moment is that it's obviously paper. We know, while we have best intentions to go out to our raised bogs and do a survey on lovely dry weather, the weather we know in Ireland can change very quickly. So at the moment, this key isn't really suitable unless we were to laminate it up. for use in the field. However, the Irish Peatland Conservation Council and the Community Wetlands Forum are working on designing a field key at the moment that could be used by community groups throughout the raised bog areas of Ireland, that you will be able to have to take out into the bog with you, that you can begin to investigate and identify the different bogland plants. So we do have a plant key coming that will be supportive of your identification of the bogland plants in your local raised bogs. Another piece of equipment that I have on the right of the screen, the top right of the screen as I look at it, is a quadrat. And you might remember these from science. A quadrat, this is a 1/2 meter by 1/2 meter quadrat. And what a quadrat does is it allows us to kind of, to pick an area on the bog. We can randomly select that area by throwing the quadrat. And what it does is gives equal opportunity to all the plants to be surveyed. We can maybe survey along a specific transect. So we can pick, for example, a 10-meter length distance across the bog and survey, the 20 quadrats along that as a representative sample of the peatland habitat. It can be quite difficult when you go out to the bog, you can be quite overwhelmed with how many plants are there when we actually start looking. So a quadrat is a great tool for you to use, that it can kind of look at specific areas. And as I said, either randomly throwing it or setting up a designated transect to follow, it can really help you to give a good representation of the plants that you'll identify on your local bogland. This particular one here is a gridded quadrat, sometimes known as a point quadrat. And this particular one would be used if we wanted to estimate the populations. So we can count using this particular quadrat to estimate the cover of a particular plant. So if we're interested in the cover of sphagnum moss, we can use this. This is the standard piece of equipment that we would use to estimate, as I said, populations or percentage cover across a bog in terms of bogland plants on raised bogs. If we didn't have the grids in the middle, we would just know it as a random quadrat. And in that case, we can, of course, estimate the populations of plants, but it's more of a subjective opinion. So I'm looking at it saying that there's 30% ling heather in the quadrat, whereas someone else might look at the same quadrat and say, oh, well, there's actually 40% Nuala, and then someone else might look at it and go, there's 20%. So it's more subjective. So using a gridded quadrat, if you were interested in doing a kind of population and percentage cover of your plants, would be the piece of equipment. But as I said, I should say as well, in terms of this quadrat, this can be made using a piece of string. It doesn't necessarily have to be this metal frame one. You can make one up 4 bamboo sticks and measure out an area on the bogland to do as well. So they can be homemade as well. We at the Bog of Allen Nature Centre, with our Leaving Cert students, we use a bit of we've made them out of a bit of plumbing pipe, just a pipe, and made a square using that. So it doesn't have to be something that you purchase. It can be something that can be easily homemade. But the purpose of using a quadrat when we are surveying or identifying our bogland plants is it gives equal opportunity for all plants to be surveyed, but it concentrates us in a particular area that we can do. And with random quadrats, you can throw 50 of them, you can throw 5 of them, or as I said, you can follow a designated transect, mark out, measure out 10 meters, a bamboo stick at either end, and you just, every quadrat, then you just roll it over. And again, it'll give you a good representation. So with this, there is going to be a key coming to support you in your work. And as I said, the IPCC and the Community Wetlands Forum are working on that together. So we hope to have that to you later in 2023. But when we go to begin with any type of key or identification key, there will be terms that we'll have to familiarize ourselves with. So in preparation for that, I just took, and again, in the time that we have with our talk this evening, I didn't want to overwhelm people with all the terms. So I've specifically looked at, say, for example, leaves on the bog. And these are just a few of the terms that you might look at when we're going through a key to help you identify the plant. So the first one is a node, and these are just small bumps or swelling where new leaves or stems are going to emerge from a plant. plants. So if you look at a kind of a stem there and you get another leaf coming out of it, at the base of the stem, you'd have a node. Then you have this, the arrangement of the leaves can have an impact. So the alternate leaves, the leaves are single on each node and a board along the stem, alternatively in ascending spiral. So that top right hand picture there sees that you have, one on the left, one on the right, slightly higher, one on the left, slightly higher than that. And they're just going in an alternative pattern along the stem. Then, of course, you can have opposite leaves. So they're just growing across from one another on the stem. We can have whorls leaves. So these are kind of growing around the stem, often 3 or more along coming from the same node. We can have basal leaves then that kind of grow very close to the lowest part, very close to the bogland surface. And in terms of leaves, you can have smooth leaves, you can have toothed-edged leaves, you can have scaly leaves, so small flat leaves resembling a scale, often seen in conifers. But from terms of bogs, we'd really look at ling heather in terms of our scaly leaves, and lancelot leaves. They're very narrow, spear-shaped, and much longer than wide. So when we begin to explore our bogland ecology in terms of identification, there'll be some of these terms that we'll have to familiarize ourselves. And as I said, there's more than this in terms of, I haven't looked at flowers this evening, but in terms of presenting and kind of an introduction into bogland plants, I didn't want to get too stuck on knowing all of the terms, but just to be aware that there will be terms that we'll have to familiarize ourselves when using the key once developed. So what I'm going to spend most of the talk on this evening is grouping our plants on the bog. And I've grouped them into a number of different groups. And the first group that I'm going to look at are lichens. Now, these lichens, they're not flowering, so they're spore producing. And it's an example of a symbiotic relationship. They are an algae and a fungi that are living together on the bog. And I've picked kind of the 4 main ones that we'll typically find on our peatlands. Again, if I had a bog plant key, I would answer a series of questions, that would bring me then to the lichens on your key and would help us identify them. So here we've got our devil's matchstick. That's the red blob of a flower. It's not really a flower all year long. You've your pixie cup lichens there in the top center. You've your antlerhorn lichen, and in the bottom then, well, that's your bearded lichen, I should say. And then in the bottom, you have an overview of your bearded lichen there as well. So lichens, when you're looking at them on the bog, as I said, plants are zoned on a bog. So where are you going to find the lichens? So as I said, when we look at the peatland surface, we really have to look at, what we know about the bog, because it can help us interpret what plants we're looking at as well. So lichens have a very special adaptation. They're one of the few plants that you'll find on the bog all year round. So if you were to do your survey in wintertime, you will find these lichens. And similarly, if you were to do your survey in summertime, you will find the lichens. They don't hibernate. So how do they survive on the bog all year? And they have a very special feature in that they can completely desiccate. So in the winter, this desiccation prevents them from freezing, so they can continue on their growth. And in summertime, it prevents them from the increased transpiration and evaporation loss. So they kind of go into like a dormancy in terms of extreme weather when it's freezing or very warm. So these lichens you will always find, because of this desiccation feature, and this is an adaptation they have to survive on the nutrient poor environments, the waterlogged conditions, and all of those other features, is that they sorry, I lost my train of thought, is that they actually always grow in the hummocks of the bog. So they do. I always lost my train of thought there. But they always grow in the drier areas of the bog. So if you're looking at a bogland surface and you're in a dry area, dry underfoot, you're going to find these lichens. These will not grow in your bog pools. So if your quadrat does land in a bog pool, you can really kind of eliminate these straight away, unless your quadrat, I suppose, lands in a drain. And at the edges of the drain, of course, it's probably potentially going to be dry. So you're going to get maybe some lichens at the edges of the drain. But again, zonation can help you identify your bogland plants in this respect. Then we come on to our nitrogen fixers, and there's two key ones that we're going to find on our boglands. On the left there, we've got our bog asphodel. This is a beautiful yellow star-shaped flower in July. It flowers in, and then what we'll also have is in the summertime. Well, I should say in the autumn time, their seed heads emerge, and they're this beautiful kind of orange color on the bog. But at this time of year, we can actually still see the seed heads from last year, and they've kind of gone a straw colored. So when you're looking at bog asphodel, I would say that's one of the easiest identifying features of it, is to look, one, for their flowers in summer. In autumn, look for their seed heads, which is bright orange. They stand upright on the bog, so they're quite noticeable. And similarly, then at this time of the year, they're quite straw looking because they've lost that color. And if you look at the base of the plant, then what we're going to find are the leaves. The leaves are very short on bog asphodel. They're quite waxy in nature and triangular shaped. So they are. So when we look at a bog, you might have to move other plant material out of the way to actually find the leaves. So I think when we're looking at bog asphodel, it's often the flowers and the seed head that's a good indication for us. On the right, then, we've got our bog myrtle. Now, I've put this in here because I didn't want to forget to mention it, that there are some plants on the bogland that have quite distinctive shape, distinctive smells, and bog myrtle is one of these. It's a very sweet smell. Another one that you'll get at the edge of the bog is gorse, and of course that is a coconutty smell on it. So even your sense of smell can help you identify your bogland plants. Both gorse and bog myrtle, I should say, are quite woody plants on the bog. And they'll typically, in terms of grow gorse typically at the edges of the bog, but bog myrtle here and the bog asphodel, they'll both grow kind of in the drier areas of the bog. As I said, the bog is nutrient poor. So these plants have adapted by actually being able to fix atmospheric nitrogen. If I go back to the bog asphodel, they've actually linked with a rhizombium bacteria that has the ability to fix atmospheric nitrogen. But to do that, they need a host plant. So the rhizombium bacteria attaches to the bog asphodel roots, and it can fix the atmospheric nitrogen, and it lends some of that nitrogen to the bog asphodel to grow. But again, both these plants hibernate. They're not like the lichens. So there are certain times of the year that when you go to the bog, the bog myrtle will be just quite woody and branching in the winter time. You're not really going to see those leaves on it, or the catkins that we're going to be getting at this time of the year. And similarly, bog asphodel is going to hibernate, so you won't find the leaves in the winter time. But as I said, with bog asphodel, you're looking for the seed heads. They're quite upright, very noticeable on the bog. And with bog myrtle, as I said, quite a woody plant as well on the bog. So these are nitrogen fixers. They're surrounding the bog myrtle has a nodule on its roots as well. So but it's not a symbiotic relationship. The bog asphodel is a symbiotic relationship, similar to those lichens where they formed a partnership. Lichens, I'm not sure if I mentioned it at the time, but they're an algae and a fungi that are living together. But both will be found in kind of drier areas of the bog because of these needing the oxygen particularly with the rhizombium bacteria and the bog asphodel. Then we're going to come into our third group, which are going to be your insect-eating plants. And we've got native and non-native examples of these. So the one on the left there is your non-native. It's your pitcher plant. These were introduced. To be honest, we don't really know how they were introduced onto Irish bogs. These are a typical plant of, North America, Canada, Indonesia. But what they do is once introduced onto boglands, they actually, like any invasive plant, they're very competitive, and they can really push out our native plants. So one of the management elements with this particular pitcher plant would be a removal from the bog, and it would be kind of seen as a restoration technique for your peatland, is to remove the invasive species from it. The pitcher plants, because all these plants are insect eating, this is another adaptation to live in this nutrient poor environment. So they all trap and eat insects. So if you were to try and grow this pitcher plant in your garden at home, it's not going to grow because it really needs very poor nutrient soil, like our peaty soil that we find on our raised bogs. But if we have a look at the other two, we have our central one here, the round leaf sundew, and then on the right we have our butterworth, and these are both native insect eating plants. Both of these have adapted to live on the bog, this nutrient poor environment, by getting supplementing their nutrients by actually trapping and eating insects. These hibernate. So when we look at it, these plants have a very short window to grow, to produce their flower. So to do that, they actually get nutrients from trapping insects. The sundew are very small. You really need to get down on your hands and knees to see this. It grows as well amongst the sphagnum mosses, many of which can be red. So you do really have to look closely into your quadrat when you're surveying for this sundews. They're tiny. They're no more wide than a €2 coin. But when you look closely at this round leaf one, you can see the tentacles on it with this sticky glue to trap insects. And how they work is, once the insect is trapped with the glue, the leaf will slowly curl in, taking about 24 hours, and they'll digest the plant through the stomata in the leaves. They'll reduce digestive juices. They'll digest the insect through the stomata. So stomata are just the pores on a leaf that they'll absorb the nutrients back in. And once that's completed, then the remains, the sundew leaf will uncurl and the remains will blow away in the wind. In terms of this particular sundew, it does prefer the lawn areas now in the bog. It's not one that you're going to really find, in particular the roundleaf sundew. It's not going to be really found in the wet pools of the bog, those hollows, or it's not going to be found on the drier areas. It kind of goes between both of them in this lawn area to catch any kind of little midges that might be coming out of the bog or emerging out of the bog pools in the evening times at this time of the year. So we know, like in the bog pools, we have our mosquito larvae, black fly larvae, all of those little midges, and they emerge out of the water. And the sundew loves the lawn area because it's going to be there to catch them. So I'd look in the lawns between these kind of drier and wetter areas on our peatland. But as I said, they do hibernate. So if we're surveying for this particular plant, you're really looking from now onwards, kind of late April through to kind of September time. And from that time, after that, then they're really beginning to hibernate again for the winter months. On the right, then you do have your butterworth. This is a more typical, I suppose, in the western areas of Ireland. We do have it, but it's not as frequent as our sundews on the kind of Midlands raised bogs. We do have it, for example, on a site that we manage, Lodge Bog. But again, it's just not as dominant as the sundew would be. This leaf, if you look at the very, I'm not sure if you can see it there, but that bright green color at the base. Remember we mentioned those basal leaves, these bright green kind of star-shaped leaf really at the bottom of the plant. And the butterworth has this glue that, as it's now trapping kind of ants or spiders as they walk across the leaf surface there. They get their legs stuck to it ultimately. And then, similar to the sundew, the butterworth leaf will curl in. You can also use the flower here of the butterworth to identify the particular plant. But again, those leaves, very short window to grow, to produce its flower, so it can produce its fruit. So that's why these plants have a kind of supplementary way of getting nutrients, and that's through their insect eating. Similarly, the bog asphodel, it hibernates. So that's why it's made this kind of nitrogen partnership with this nitrogen fixers out on the bog as well. So when we think about it, all these plants are really adapting to the bog, and where they're living is, we're really trying to avoid competition as well out on the bog. So now we have our sundews and in the lawn areas, we've got our drier ones like our ling heathers and the bog asphodels there. So we're really trying, as a group of plants, we're trying to avoid competition. We're really trying to survive on this very wet, nutrient poor environment as well. And we're coming up with different methods of doing that. Then we come into our bog sedges, and of course our iconic bog cottons. They're just beginning to produce their seed heads out on our bogland raised bogs at the moment. So really, the two dominant ones that are very unmistakable are going to be your hare's tail cotton grass. That's often known as, sometimes referred to as single-headed bog cotton, because it's got one flowering head, and then you've also got your common cotton grass. They can have between 4 and 5 flowering heads. Single-headed or the hare's tail cotton grass, a very needle-like leaves, so very upright needle-like leaves, whereas the common cotton grass, the leaf is a little bit more wider. By no means is it a broadleaf. One characteristic of all of our bogland plants that I hope you'd notice through these images here is they're all very narrow leaved. And the reason for that is, of course, it's a method of protecting themselves, because on a leaf they have these pores, and in summertime when they're exposed to the extremes, you're going to have, if you have a big broad leaf, you're going to be exposed to more transpiration. That's the water loss from a plant. So if you have a narrow leaf, it's a means of protecting the plant from loss of water. So at this time of the year, you're going to have, as I said, your cotton grasses. So at this time of the year, very easily identifiable between the two. With the hare's tail cotton grass, then you're looking at a needle-like leaf, very tufted growth as well. So it grows in rather a tuft form. Whereas on the other hand, your the common cotton grass or many-headed bog cotton, doesn't really form that tufted areas. And again, both of them will be found in different areas of the bog. So hare's tail cotton grass tends to be in the drier areas of the bog. Common cotton grass, on the other hand, you'll see this growing out of bog pools. It actually has, the leaves are green, but they do have this kind of maroon red color in it as well. And the reason the common cotton grass can survive in the pools on the bog, there's a few plants that will actually live in the pools, but it's because they're known as a bog snorkeler. They have this really special adaptation from the tip of the leaf right down into the roots of the plant. They've got an air tube known as aerenchyma, so it actually can survive. So while you'll find a common cotton grass in drier areas or lawn areas, the dominant area you're going to find it in the bog or in your bog pools. The main reason for that is going to be fewer competition out the bog pools. Of course, you'll have your bog bean in the bog pools as well, lovely white star-shaped flower, but there's certainly less competition in the bog pools than there are on our lawns and our hummocks on the bog. Our other two then on the left of the screen are our white beak sedge and our deer grasses, and both are beginning to bloom now. They both as well, I should say, have needle-like leaves, very similar to the hare's tail cotton grass. So it can be difficult to identify them, especially deer grass, because deer grass is also tufted as well. So the best time really to identify them would be through their flowers, and we can see the really distinct flowers that we have here. White beak sedge has got their little white flowers. Deer sedge grasses there have got their kind of brown, and as I said, our hare's tail cotton grass. The white beak sedge, it also tends to be lower growing than our deer grass or a hare's tail cotton grass as well. But our bog sedges, some preferring the drier areas, but common cotton grass, it's a definite lover of the water, the bog hollows out in our bog. Then we have a group of plants that you're going to be very familiar with out in the bog, a very dominant plant, and they're your heathers. And these are the three key heathers that you'll find on your bogland. So you've got your ling heather, your crossleaf teeth in the center, and your bell heather. And this is where we really come down into the leaf arrangement that can really support you in identifying between these particular species. First off, if we look at the ling heather, it has a very distinctive flower compared to your bell and your crossleaf teeth, but you could get confused between crossleaf teeth and bell heather. So as I said, we go back down to the leaf structure of them, and that will help us identify between them. In terms of the ling heather, you can't really see it. There's that one there. You can maybe make it out there, but they have those scaly-like leaves, very small leaves on them, very scaly leaves. And I should say, all of your heathers, none of them hibernate because they're a very dry plant on the bog. So you can identify your heathers all year round on your bog. But the two between that can be a bit more difficult to tell between would be your crossleaf teeth and your bell heather. They've both got those fused petals that look like a bell. So these are like between those little kind of bells that we see. They're between 4 and 5 little petals that have fused together to create that shape. So what you're doing here is you're really looking at the leaf now at this point. So on the crossleaf teeth, as its name suggests, the leaves are arranged in a kind of a whirl around the stem. So that means that, there's a number 3 or more leaves around the stem. But in the case of a crossleaf teeth, there's 4 leaves around that stem. So it's arranged a bit like a cross. So it is opposite one another on the stem. You then look at your bell heather, and they are again arranged in a whorl, but they're arranged in threes. So out in the bog, that's a good way to identify between them. To be honest with you, though, in terms of raised bog, bell heather is again more of a western plant. You're not going to get it as dominant here in the kind of in the Midlands. So where I am in Kildare, I'm not going to expect to find, bell heather. It's more of a Ericsson near it. It's more of a kind of a western plant. But it's not to say that you might not come across it, especially on those western raised bogs as well. So again, it's leaf structure and a shape that you're looking at there. But these will be on the bog all year. Ideally, if they have the flower in it, it can help identify between species. But as I said, with the crossleaf teeth and the bell heather, they're easily confused. So you're going down to the leaf structure there on the bog when we're looking at those. And then, of course, we have to look at our sphagnum mosses. So we've had a look now. We've grouped the lichens together. We've grouped the sedges together. We've grouped our insect-eating plants together, our nitrogen fixers together, our heathers. And our next group that we have to look at are the sphagnum mosses. And we really have to, these are the bog building. These really indicate the health of your bog. This is one particular sphagnum plant on the left of the screen here, but you can see from that image I have, sphagnum doesn't grow individually, it grows together. So it creates this kind of mat or carpet over our raised bog surface. And what we have is the only part that's alive in a sphagnum moss is that head, that growing tip is the only part that's alive. Everything underneath that that's not in contact with light is dying, and that's ultimately what's forming your peat, this dead plant material. The sphagnum mosses are known as the bog builders because they grow upright from this head 1 millimeter a year. And as they grow upwards, they're kind of swallowing up the leaf litter left behind of our common cotton grasses and the leaves of our bog asphodels and those hibernating plants. So when we look at peat, it's not just sphagnum moss, it can also be our common cotton grasses and all those plants that have hibernated over the winter. Just their leaf litter is being swallowed into the bog by the sphagnum mosses. They do hold a lot of water, and they do that by a special adaptation, and that is they have these side lateral kind of spreading arms, and these interlock with other sphagnum mosses to create these external water storage areas. And then internally in the stem of the plant, which we need a microscope to see, is we look and we see these hyaline cells, and these cells are also water storage cells. So we've got two ways of storing water out on the bog for us. But as this is our main peat forming plant that you really want to see a lot of on the bog. And there are a number of varieties of sphagnum mosses. And again, this evening, I'm not going to go through them all with you, but I've just picked out 4 of them here for you to have a look at this evening. So our first one on our left there, Sphagnum cuspidatum. It's also known as feathery bog moss. And this is particularly found in pools. So it's quite a distinctive one to find in your bog pools. It's a yellowy green in color. And what we kind of can start to identify our bogland sphagnum mosses from are 1, the colors, and 2, the head size, because the head size does make a difference. So in terms of our cuspidatum, it's kind of a medium to large head size. So we kind of say measurements, we bring a ruler with you, about 1.5 centimeters, but it's also quite shaggy in nature, and you can see that from the cuspidatum. So of the bog mosses, it is quite a distinctive kind of bog moss to identify on the bog. I should say with the feathery bog moss, there is another feathered bog moss that we find in the drier areas of the bog as well. It grows in amongst the heather plant. It's just referred to as feather moss, but we also know Sphagnum cuspidatum as feathery bog moss, but cuspidatum will always be found in the bog pools. You can also identify your sphagnum mosses. One trick that I use with students is if you push your finger, obviously not with the cuspidatum, but with the other ones, if you push your finger down on the sphagnum, you should see water oozing out of the sphagnum because it does hold, quite significant amount of water within the body of the plant. So when you kind of touch the sphagnum, this water will ooze up out of the sphagnum onto your fingers. So it's a good indication, to see whether am I looking at just a simple feathered moss on the bog or whether I'm looking at a sphagnum. The second one then in from the left of the screen, Sphagnum capillifolium. It's another common one that you're going to get on boglands. It's also known as acute leaved bog moss. Now this, in the opposite to the cuspidatum, it's found on the hummocks, and it's a deep maroon red color to yellowish. So if you have a look there, and it's medium head size, so it's 1.5 centimeters. But if we have a look in the shade, capillifolium can change color. So it can be kind of this greeny yellow color as well. So that's what we're seeing through the capillifolium there. So it doesn't necessarily have to be this kind of deep maroon color. So color change can occur within the sphagnum mosses, which can challenge us in identifying them. But again, we're always looking at the head size, again, 1.5 centimeters, and it's typically going to be found on a drier area of the bog. So it is. Then if we look over the next one, this Sphagnum magellanicum, and this is really distinctive now, a bit different now from our capillifolium, because it's got a very large head size. It's up to 2 centimeters wide, this growing tip, very dull wine red color. So again, you know, when we look at the colors here, capillifolium and magellanicum, they have that, you know, this maroon color on the bog. So we're identifying these now between the head sizes. So magellanicum is very big, 2 centimeter head size. Capillifolium is going to be that bit smaller. Again, with our magellanicum, they can be variegated, so it can go to kind of a greener color as well. So that can be different. And again, where it grows, the capillifolium grows on the hummocks, the drier areas, but it's not to say they won't be found on lawns as well. And like this, magellanicum is found on lawns. So between these two, really the head size will give you a good indication of what you're looking at here. But if we look then at the fourth one that I chose, and this is Sphagnum papillosum. And if we look really, before even looking at the colors, I don't know if you can notice there, but they're both very similar in terms of the shape of the head. And that's because they're both large. They're both like 2 centimeters wide. Look at where they're growing as well. They're both found in the same areas, so the bog lawns. So both of them will be growing intermixed. Now, in terms of the papillosum, there'll never be any red. There won't be a trace of red in it. However, we do know with the magellanicum, it can kind of be variegated between red and green and that. So we can get a bit of confusion in here with the identification, maybe at times, between our magellanicum and our papillosum. And this is why the identification of sphagnum mosses on our raised bogs can be a little bit more of a kind of a learning curve that we have to go through compared to maybe some of our other plants like our heathers or our, you know, our lichens or, you know, the insect eating plants. Because sometimes with our sphagnum mosses, we do have to go down to microscopic level with those. And just kind of to give you an example here. So if we were to get the microscope out and to have a look at them, so on the left of the screen again, 4 of the large group of sphagnum mosses, your Astinae magellanicum, your plustrum, and your papillosum, they're very distinct under the microscope because they have this conspicuous stem cortex, this cortex within them there. So that's the thing, but that still doesn't help us identify between magellanicum and papillosum. So if we go back here, just to kind of, I know because the names, you know, are kind of Latin. So this is our magellanicum and our papillosum here. So again, large head size, both found in lawns. This never has a trace of red. However, our magellanicum can be kind of variegated. So we could sometimes get this confused with the papillosum. So we've gone now to microscopic level. And what we have here now is we find both of these, again, have this strong cortex within it. So now we have to go a step further and we have to look into the cell walls of the sphagnum. And with the sphagnum papillosum, what we're going to find are these little bumps. I don't know if you can kind of see them there within it on the cell walls. And that's how we're going to identify, to be 100% sure between the two. Sphagnum plustrum that I haven't showed you there, it doesn't have any cell walls, that these papillae or bumps on the cell walls either. So it's a good indication there between whether you're looking at Sphagnum magellanicum or papillosum. Then if we look at Astinae, the green cells here, again, I haven't shown you an actual picture of this sphagnum, but when you look at the cell walls, you have these bristle-like projections within it. So when we're looking at our sphagnum mosses, and as I said, I just picked 4 this evening to kind of give you an example of where you might find them. So what you're looking for in terms of the plant, so where they're growing on the bog, you know, that the head size can really help you indicate to them. And again, but with even that, you can find that there can be sometimes a bit of confusion between them. So I just particularly picked these 2, as I said, the color can be, you know, the variegated color in the magellanicum can sometimes confuse us in that. So overall, when we look, I know I've been talking for quite some time. I do apologize about that. But when we look at it, boglands, and I suppose I shouldn't really, because there's so many fascinating bogland, raised bog plants out there. We could talk for hours and hours on them. But I suppose when we're beginning our identification journey of bogland plants, I'd first understand the site where I am, because that can help us to indicate what plants we might expect to find. Some plants are in the drier areas of the bog, some are in the wetter areas. So for example, if you have a bog that's quite drained, you might not expect to find your Sphagnum cuspidatum out there. You might not, bog cotton, it can live in the wetter areas and the drier areas. It's a snorkeler, it can live wherever it wants to on the bog, but at the same time, it can do that because it can only do that because of its snorkeling nature. And of course, if you're going to have the drier areas of the bog, then you're going to get an increase in your heather plants out there. You're going to get an increase in your lichens, and then you're going to see a decrease in your sphagnum mosses, probably a decrease as well over time in your insect-eating sundews as well out in the bog. But overall, as I said, when we're looking at our bogland plants, we understand that they have many adaptations to adapt to, because they're living in a nutrient poor, wet environment, very exposed environment to all the extremes. They have to survive with the winter time. Some will hibernate, some will not. So when you're looking at identification of bogland plants, probably the summertime is the best time to do a survey. If you were to do a survey in winter time, you might, with your bog asphodel, you might see, the seed heads will be there for you to identify, but it makes it a little bit more difficult. So I'd recommend identification in the summertime. Using a quadrat as well, it can help us to give equal opportunity to all the plants to be surveyed, whether you do it using a quadrat, and whether you do it using a transect, setting out a specific, number of meters along the bog, or whether you randomly throw it, 5 to 10 times on the bog, depending on again, how many times you throw a quadrant will depend on the detail that you're looking for. And again, the size of the bog will have an impact on that as well. But in general, bogs are home to amazing bogland plants. And I hope this has given you an introduction into how I identify them out on the bog, from where they live. So they are zoned, features of them that I can look out for on the bog. And of course, as I said, shortly there will be that plant ID that'll be suitable for the field, that we can bring it out. It'll have good illustration, and all we have to do at that point then is just familiarize ourselves with some of those terms that we might not speak about in everyday terms, like a node, or a basil, leaf, or a lancelot, or that. So we just will familiarize our terms, but once you have the tools, you can identify any plant on a raised bog. Thank you very much for inviting me to the Community Wetlands Forum, for being part and sharing some of my knowledge on our bogland plants. And what I'll do is I'll hand you back now to Micheál for any questions.
Brilliant. Thanks a million, Nuala. That was fantastic. Yeah, lots of great information and tips there. So we have about 10 minutes or so for a few questions, for 2 or 3 questions. So I suppose I might just start as one that's in the chat, and I know you touched on it a little bit already, Nuala, but it's just, is there a bog plant swatch or booklet available? I don't know if you want to say anything more about that.
So there is, so obviously with all of our plants, there are ID guides, and that was specific to kind of our raised bog ones. The IPCC in 1998, we developed our Day on the Bog field study guide, and within that there is the, there is the identification key. But as I said, that's not kind of practical to take out onto the bog with us. So what we are doing at the moment, IPCC and the Community Wetlands Forum, is we are developing a pull-out field study guide for raised bog plants, where you can follow a series of questions. Again, images do help in identifying between plants. So obviously, there was the roundleaf sundew from the bog asphodel, but there are certain plants, as I said, like your sphagnum mosses, or like your antlerhorn lichen versus your bearded lichen. They can be a little bit more difficult to distinguish between, or similarly your crossleaf heath and your bell heather. So by having a series of questions, or, you know, to accompany the images, can really help us identify that. So that is coming in 2023. We're just working on kind of the company who's going to lay it out and design it for us to make it very user friendly. And I think there are other swatches you can use. I know that in the interim, you know, as part of the Wild Atlantic Nature, they have developed a swatch that you can use in the field. Now it is specific as well to the blanket bog. So there are some plants in it, like Western gorse, that we're not going to expect to find on our raised bogs in the Midlands, but it is a handy one to have in the interim. On IPCC's website, we have got a raised bog poster of plants that you can use as well. But as I said, with that, again, it sometimes can be tricky to distinguish between them just from an image, especially your sphagnum mosses out there. And as I said, your heathers, you can, you know, the arrangement of the leaves and things like that can help. So there is work being done on that, as I said, between Community Wetlands Forum and the Irish Peatlands Conservation Council. So coming soon.
Brilliant. Thanks, Nuala. And there was just actually a question there as you were talking about the difference between raised bogs and blanket bogs. But the question is, are there many differences in vegetation on raised bogs and blanket bogs?
I suppose blanket bogs, they're very similar. Okay, so blanket bogs are younger, but we have to notice in terms of the slope of the blanket bogs is going to be much more different. Blanket bogs tend to have a lot more of a grassy, sedgy appearance as well. So that's something to watch out for in the upland bogs. And you will get a change in some species, as I said, like Western gorse, bell heather is going to be dominant over in our blanket bogs. And another one as well is going to be your black bog rush. So, you know, at the edges of our raised bogs, we're going to get hard rush. These are just the ones we make our St. Bridget's crosses out of during the summertime. But in the west, you're going to get this black bog rush, and that's very typical of what you might find in a fen plant, you know, in a fen habitat. So blanket bogs do have slightly more nutrients within them to support the different communities out there. But generally, on a visual, you're going to have very much more kind of a sedgy, grassy appearance to it. You will have a network of pools, often more visual, you know, in terms of a blanket bog compared to a raised bog as well. But yeah, there will be slight differences in the plants. But again, they will support, like your ling heathers, you're going to get in both. You're going to get your, you know, the different sphagnums in different areas. And again, that will depend as well on the habitat, the assessment of your habitat. So again, they won't all grow unless your habitat is a completely healthy bogland. But at the same time, we also know we've only got 1% active bog growth. So really, when we go down to even just our individual raised bogs that we have here in the Midlands, it will depend what plants we get, depending on you know, the quality of the habitat assessment. You know, so are we looking at drainage? Has there been an unfortunate fire on the bog? And things like that can have an impact on it as well. But yes, there is a difference overall between blanket and raised bog, but there'll be also crossover as well.
Right, thanks, Nuala. And another question is just if you have any comment on rosemary and cranberry.
Yeah, I suppose, look, I did have to leave a few out. I did look at rosemary. I did have a slide on kind of fruits, and I was like, oh, okay, put in cranberry and froth, and I had to stop myself at some point because by no means could I cover everything today. So rosemary, again, when we look at, as I said, very narrow leaves on it, much longer leaves as well. And rosemary, a good distinguishing, it's an early flower, so it's already in flower, quite kind of like a tubular kind of flower on it. But a good indication for rosemary is the leaves are always going to be alternate. So alternate along a stem, quite low growing, but it's quite a long leaf. So this lancelot leaf that we spoke about, much longer than wide, and it's also curled. It curls in, and that's to minimize water loss on the plant. Very kind of bright, glossy green leaf on the rosemary as well. And again, if you look on the underside, it'd be curled in, very kind of silvery, pale color on it. So they'd be my kind of tips for looking at rosemary: is alternate leaves, lancelot leaves as well, much longer than wider, and glossy and curled in. Cranberry then is again alternate leaves, but it's going to be crawling over it's kind of a real spreader out over the bog over the bog sphagnum mosses. So it is very much smaller leaf now, very oval shaped, not toothed. And again, the cranberry is the obvious one. So very easy to identify in the summertime. But this one really crawls over the sphagnum mosses, kind of creates like a mat over the sphagnum mosses where it really grows if it's growing dominantly on the bogland surface as well. Of course, bilberries then, or if you're frohans, much more shrubby plant, so much bigger on the bog. So it is.
Brilliant. Thanks, Nuala. It's maybe time for one more question if there is one. If not, we might wrap up there. So listen, thanks a million, Nuala. That was a really brilliant presentation. Really appreciate it, and all that you managed to squeeze into a short period of time. And yeah, no, that was really good, and I enjoyed that myself a lot, as I'm sure. When looking at the comments coming in the chat, I think that is definitely the consensus. So the recording for this presentation will be made available on the Community Wetlands Forum YouTube channel. So I'll do that over the coming days. So keep an eye out for that. But otherwise, just yeah, thanks again to Nuala, and thanks to everyone for coming along this evening. Really appreciate it. And hopefully see some of you on the 27th in Tyrrell's Pass. And as I said, communitywetlandsforum.ie /events. You'll find information on that. But have a good evening in the meantime. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Neil. I would say to everyone just before you pop off there is, don't be scared of bog plant identification. There is a lot of plants out there, but I think just going out, and if you go out, the aim to just identify one, it's a build up. I often think about learning these skills is a lifelong learning process. I don't claim to know every bogland plant out there. So again, I'm still in that learning because it is a learning process. So I encourage everyone to get out there and try and identify one bogland plant. Maybe you could do a challenge every week, Micheál, find your link heather and find what can you find on the bog, and then together we can post the pictures and we can see that they all look the same out there. But again, it's it can be overwhelming if you're beginning your journey in plant identification, but again, we all have to start, and it's a lifelong learning process. So we'll all get there. And again, a great initiative to see that any records that we do get, submit them into the National Biodiversity Data Centre. One of the challenges we have in Ireland is less than 10% of our plants, our biodiversity has been surveyed. So, submitting it in, it'll give us a good overall knowledge. And as I said, if we all work together on that, we can really make a difference. So I'll stop there now.
Brilliant. Yeah, we can rise to that challenge, and yeah, that's a good idea. So yeah, listen, thanks a million again, and yeah, hope to see some of you soon, hopefully in Tyrrell's Pass. Thanks very much.
Bye, everyone.
Take care.